Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a very exciting and perfectly timed Ask Me Anything session with the one and only Dr. Maleeha Lodhi. Dr. Maleeha, of course, needs no introduction. She is a rock star diplomat, has been Pakistan's most impactful and visible diplomat over the last 3 decades. She's had a front row seat to history as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, to the United Nations and the United Kingdom. But in addition to having a front row seat to history, she also has a very savvy foresight on how things are going to play out. And with everything that's been happening in the world over the weekend and before that, we have a lot to unpack with her. So we've got a few questions from the audience that we'll get started with, and then we'll open it up again towards the end of the last 15-20 minutes to take any questions live here from folks as well. But first of all, Dr. Maleeha, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our Paklaunch session today.
Thank you. It's great to see you, Bilal. And I must say that Ali does a splendid job in getting us all together and doing all sorts of initiatives. So to Ali, a big thank you from Islamabad.
Absolutely. And I don't know how he does it. He was just telling me he's an introvert. I'm like, I don't know, maybe in your physical life you're an introvert, but digitally you're not an introvert at all. So Dr. Maleeha, to get us started, this has been quite the weekend with Iran sort of retaliating against Israel, CNN and other folks sort of setting alarm bells as World War III coming, which is a bit alarmist and over the top. But would love to get your wisdom and insight. How do you view what happened over the weekend and sort of escalating tensions in the Middle East between Iran and Israel and also in the broader conflict of Israel and Gaza? Curious to get your viewpoint on that.
Okay, so let me start with that then. It's the most current issue. And obviously the world is totally, the world is fixed on this at the moment. I think, it was not unexpected. Everybody knew that the Iranians would undertake a retaliatory response to what the Israelis had done by bombing their consulate or their diplomatic mission in Damascus. So the Iranians had made it very clear that they would respond. However, they responded in a very measured way. They made it very clear that their aim was not to inflict any damage, and certainly there were no casualties, but to send a strong message. And I think by doing that, Iran has set some new red lines, and it's also changed the rules of the game in the Middle East. Because for a long time, what was going on between Iran and Israel was a shadow war. It's widely seen as a shadow war. So it was a covert conflict where both countries did take actions against each other. But basically, it was Israel assassinating nuclear scientists, assassinating their commanders in Iran and beyond. And Iran didn't respond to any of that, overtly at least. Although Iran is accused of using its so-called proxies. But this really was a fundamental break from the past, because Iran, as I said, sent a message that this is our red line. If you cross it again, there'll be hell to pay. Now, how much hell to pay there will be, we don't know. And now, of course, the region is on tenterhooks. It's on edge because we don't know how the Israelis will respond. But for the first time, the Biden administration is putting a great deal of pressure on Tel Aviv, on the Israeli Prime Minister, telling them, don't do anything reckless. And if you do get into a military action against Iran, we're not going to be part of it. So I think this is where we are. But naturally, in Pakistan also, we're watching the situation very closely, because if that region is destabilized, Iran is our neighbor, then clearly, the destabilization impact will be felt in South Asia as well. And certainly, Pakistan will have to also then confront the challenge of perhaps a spike in the oil price. Oil has already gone up, but it hasn't gone up by a lot, because perhaps the markets are reading the US desire for restraint. So, I've been saying, and I'll end on that note, I've been saying in a lot of my interviews yesterday that there is no country that wants an escalation in the Middle East other than Israel. The US doesn't want it, Iran doesn't want it, the Arab countries don't want it. The Arabs particularly don't want it because it takes the focus away from Gaza, and which is the root cause of why this happened. I mean, this is a spillover, obviously, of what happened. I mean, Israel's war that it's imposed on Gaza. So I think this is where we are. And my own sense is I think things will likely calm down, and Israel may well be restrained from doing anything which could lead to further escalation.
Absolutely. And we hope there's de-escalation as well. I want to sort of unpack Pakistan's, the implications of this for Pakistan a little bit. Yeah, you mentioned them briefly. It's been noticeable how little role Pakistan has had in the middle of all of this, or sort of, done anything sort of that's been visible. Curious for your take on whether you see any medium-term implications for Pakistan on this, and also, like, does Pakistan have a role to play here when it comes to de-escalating tensions, or is Pakistan just mired so much in its own political instability and our weak economy that we can't put our head up and make any sort of impact here?
No, I think the countries that have a role are in the Middle East. I think Pakistan has played whatever role it can at the United Nations, where we were quite instrumental in changing the dynamic for the resolution in the UN General Assembly. Of course, we're not a member of the Security Council. We will be, inshallah, next year, 2024. We become a non-permanent member if we win the election, which is in June this year. But, beyond that, we can only act as part of the OIC in a collective forum. Beyond that, I think we have sent assistance via Egypt to the Palestinian people who are suffering in Gaza. So, we have acted on different levels, diplomatic, economic, by sending this assistance. And also, I think, calling repeatedly, as we did even yesterday, I believe, or maybe earlier this morning, for a ceasefire in Gaza. So, we have sort of raised our voice on this. Medium-term implications, I think, again, instability in the Middle East obviously affects us. And instability on our border with Iran affects us too. Iran is a neighbor, as I said before. So the last thing we want is any kind of conflict that spills over into our part of the world. So that's who we are.
Absolutely. Now, since we've kicked off the discussion with Iran, there was a question that we got from the audience that talked about, Pakistan-Iran relations and also Pakistan's relations with Afghanistan. There was a cross-border operation between Iran and Pakistan as well a couple of months ago, and tensions sort of flared up. Can you talk a little bit about Pakistan's relations with Iran and with Afghanistan, and where you see them going sort of in the context of both these recent tensions, but also sort of prior, the pre-existing tensions between our countries on the West?
Well, I mean, if we take Iran first, our relations with Iran have always been testy since the Islamic Revolution in Tehran. And it's been, it's been an on and off relationship in that sense. But of course, to have a good relationship with Iran is a strategic compulsion because we have contested borders on the other side. We have troubled relations with India, as you know, and we've had an unstable border because there have been so many internal conflicts in Afghanistan and, of course, wars in Afghanistan. So we have very much, Pakistan has wanted to have a stable, peaceful relationship with Iran, also exploring avenues for economic cooperation. Now, of course, when Iran, there has been a problem, there are unresolved issues. One of the unresolved issues is that both countries accuse each other of not doing enough to control or contain militant armed groups on their side of the border. So the Iranians have often said that, you have to control these groups in your part of Balochistan. And we say to them, well, you've got these groups also, which pose a threat to our security. So I think border management remains an unresolved issue in that sense of the word. And that's what led to the Iranian strike inside Pakistani territory. And then, as you know, Pakistan also responded and returned that compliment, so to speak. But after that, there has been a de-escalation very quickly in these tensions. And next week, the president of Iran visits Pakistan. So
Mhm.
you can see from that there is a warming in relations. But of course, there are unresolved issues which need to be fixed. With Afghanistan, I mean, I'll try to be as brief as possible because it's such a long story. But relations really began to hit an all-time low in the last year and a half. And it sort of, it sort of defied the conventional wisdom that seemed to have afflicted our ruling elite at that time when the Taliban took over, where it was believed that with the Taliban returning to power, Pakistan would be able to secure its western border. Well, that hope certainly didn't materialize. That expectation didn't come true. Instead, we had a situation and have a situation where the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, which poses a huge threat and is responsible for so many terrorist attacks in Pakistan, and there's been a surge in the last year or so. The Taliban have not responded to Pakistan's, repeated ask of them, which is, you got to contain them, you got to demobilize them, you got to dismantle them, you got to arrest the leaders, you got to hand over these people to us or just keep them in detention. But you got to do something. And they have responded, over the last year, there were many rounds of talks on this issue. They responded by saying, give us time, give us time, give us time. And we said, okay, sure, take time, take your time, but, get on with it. They didn't get on with it. And I think that led then to a hardening in Pakistan's policy. And, what I have been writing is that Pakistan then adopted a coercive approach towards the Taliban authorities, which had three elements. One, we announced that we are going to repatriate and send back undocumented Afghans. And now the second phase is going to begin because some of the documented ones are going to go back too. These are people who were issued special cards here. The second thing we did was we placed new restrictions on transit trade. It was also aimed at smuggling because they would import stuff that they didn't need and then it would come straight back here. And that was playing havoc with our economy. So we did that. So that had an economic and a political purpose.
Yeah.
And thirdly, at the public level, the Pakistani government and its top officials began to criticize publicly the Taliban for not doing enough to deal with these terrorist groups. So I think this is where we are right now. Pakistan's hope is that this coercive approach will persuade the Taliban to respond. But at the same time, it's been using the carrot as well. Because some of their trade requests to us or demands of us, we've said, yes, we're prepared to be conciliatory on some of these to make it easy for you, because for Afghanistan, landlocked Afghanistan, one, transit trade is crucial for them. And two, that state makes much of its money through these trading routes and through, customs duty and so on. I mean, their version of customs duty, etc. So it's a huge thing for them. So let's see if this carrot and stick approach works, but, only time will tell. We don't know as yet.
Absolutely. And that's fascinating. And taking a carrot and stick approach to Afghanistan is very interesting because traditionally we have not really had much of a stick there as well. In context of, what's happening in the world and particularly in our region as well, we have a foreign minister who has limited foreign affairs experience, let me put it that way. He comes from a finance minister background. How do you see that playing into our foreign policy? Does it matter? And how do you view sort of having a foreign minister in this moment who has limited foreign affairs experience?
Well, I think the first thing is that increasingly in all countries of the world, practically all countries of the world, the chief executive of the country also acts as foreign minister. So whether it's Biden or it's, President Xi or Putin or whoever, Modi, a great deal of foreign policy really is not, in the hands of the foreign ministries of those countries. They are the implementing agency, of course, and then they have a huge input. I'm not for a moment de-emphasizing that. But chief executives do play a huge role. So I think we shouldn't discount that. So a great deal of what will happen or unroll here in Pakistan, we will see how Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif becomes sort of a foreign policy chief, if you like. Coming to Mr. Ishaq Dar, yes, it's true. He has no previous experience in foreign policy, but he's had considerable international exposure as finance minister for obvious reasons. He had to deal with the IMF, he had to deal with the World Bank, he had to deal with China, the United States, and so on. So, I wouldn't say that he doesn't have any experience. He has a different kind of experience. And then there is the issue of, we have a very professional foreign ministry. That's whenever they're asked to make an input. At times they're not. But when they're asked, I think they're as good as it gets. I mean, I worked with them in 3 different missions. And I can tell you, we have some of the best diplomats in the world. At the UN, many representatives of other countries, ambassadors of other countries used to say, we envy you and we envy your team. So, if there are things that we should take pride in, we should also take pride in. We shouldn't beat up on ourselves on everything. We beat up on ourselves quite a bit. So I think if you combine all of this, then the foreign minister will be assisted by a professional ministry. He has a prime minister who will play a key role in the making of foreign policy. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is the Pakistani military. Because a great deal of our foreign policy is still security oriented, consists of security issues. So the military has a role, as a result of that. So really, in a way, foreign policy making is the consequence or the result or the outcome of several actors. Now, this happens in other countries too, of course, depending on what the issue is. But in our country, naturally, the military has had a certain past, a certain role, and therefore certain areas of foreign policy, let's say, they have greater influence than perhaps militaries in other countries.
Absolutely. And yeah, here's to hoping, the foreign minister both seeks input from and listens to the advice that he gets from the foreign ministry as well. So I want to move to Pakistan-US relations. And I want to ask what you feel are the key drivers of our relationship, Pakistan-US relationship over the next 3 years. And also, it feels like we have a relatively neutral to positive, superficial relationship right now, but not a deep strategic relationship that would be very meaningful for either side. So what do you see or foresee anything that could help us build a more deeper and strategic relationship right now with the US as well?
Well, to start with, the relationship between the two countries today are at an inflection point. We're at a crossroads. And the reason is very simple. For 20 years, Afghanistan was the main convergence, let's say, between the two countries. But since the US military withdrawal from Afghanistan a couple of years ago, this relationship needed to be reset. It needed to be reconfigured and redefined. But President Biden took very little interest in Pakistan. In fact, I was saying in a previous sort of lecture that I was giving to civil servants here, and it was actually on Pakistan-US relations. I said, this is extraordinary that for 5 years, I mean, the Biden administration is about to complete its term. The foreign minister of the United States, the Secretary of State, never bothered to visit Pakistan. Not for 1 hour, not for 1 day, not for 6 hours, never. That tells you something about the nature of the relationship. Even when Pakistan was helping the United States in its evacuation from Afghanistan, they would never have been able to do that without us. We provided them the air bridge, land bridge, what have you. We got the people out of there in so many ways because everybody could not be airlifted. They had to come via, a great deal of them had to come via Pakistan. Even then, we never really got a thank you from anybody of any significance in the Biden administration. The National Security Advisor of the United States has never come to my country to, So it's at an inflection point, and these are just examples which tell you where we are right now. But I think the challenge ahead, when you ask about drivers, the challenge ahead is to see how much space there is to build a new relationship, the space between the fact that the United States has chosen India as its partner of choice in the region because it wants to use India as a counterweight to China, and because Pakistan's partner, let's say, of choice is China. And we are a pivotal part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and CPEC is crucial for Pakistan's economic progress. So between these two, and of course, as you know very well, Bilal, the overriding strategic priority of the United States today is containment of China. So therefore, the Pakistan-China relationship, the US-India relationship creates constraints on the Pak-US relationship. So as I said, then, we have to then meet the challenge of finding that space and seeing, where are the areas of convergence, where can we cooperate. I think the vision that Pakistani policymakers have of the future of this relationship is one that goes beyond. First of all, Pakistan wants to be seen, from the prism of its intrinsic importance, not as a subset of another country, not as a function of the United States interest in Afghanistan, as it was in the past. Secondly, Pakistan wants to broaden this relationship beyond the security focus because it's been so security oriented. So, Pakistan seeks greater trade, investment, cooperation or relationship with the United States, as well as, building ties in areas like IT and many other education. So, these are some of the areas that Pakistan certainly would like to explore. But I think we will now have to wait for the American election to be over to see who is the next, who forms the next government in the US. And only then can there be a reset. And for that reset, I think Pakistan will have to also, use some imagination as well as be much more active on Capitol Hill than it has been. And I think have a greater sort of interaction with the diaspora, especially those parts of the diaspora or elements or people in the diaspora who are politically engaged in the American system. These are people who are, are assets, if you like, who can be leveraged, which, I know that because I worked so closely with some of our organizations and with some of our individuals who carry a lot of weight in the American political system. So I think, here are some of the building blocks, but here are also some of the challenges. So we will have to just wait and see. I tell you one thing, it may sound very funny. Maybe it's not funny. In Pakistan, I think if anybody did an opinion poll, they would find the majority of Pakistanis saying, we'd prefer President Trump.
Yeah.
And when you ask them why, some are not able to explain why. Others say, well, at least it'll be a fresh start because we've seen the Biden administration and they didn't really pay much attention to us.
Yeah.
They didn't give us the respect that we deserved, we feel. So, there is, American officials tell me this, that when we come to your country, we get very surprised because we keep hearing all of this, that no, we'd rather have it. But anyway, we're not voting for the US president. So,
No, that's a fascinating undercurrent, and it's very active here in the Pakistani American community as well.
Really?
It is, and it's sort of rising, and it has more to do with sort of a value system, and as well as there's a large majority of Pakistani Americans who are pro-Imran Khan, for lack of a better word, and they feel like Trump and Imran Khan might have an unlock over there. You talked about the need for, Pakistan to be intrinsically valued for who it is, although I'm not sure whenever in our history that has ever happened. But the geopolitical rent that we get for where we are strategically located is a more sort of something that we've counted on historically. With what's happening with Israel and Iran, one can anticipate that Iran's reaction was to draw a red line with Israel, but I'm sure the Gulf countries and Saudi in particular took notice of what Iran did. And whenever Saudi feels insecure, Pakistan becomes more important because Pakistan has both the men as well as the bombs that could need to protect some of these countries. Do you feel like there's any pathway in which these tensions between Iran and Israel result in Pakistan becoming more important, at least for the Gulf countries, when it comes to security? No.
The short answer is no. And I'd like to really answer your question in a slightly different way, but return to the specifics of your question later. First of all, I always say this, foreign policy begins at home. If your home base is weak, you can be strategically located anywhere. But if you have a weak economy, you don't export, you don't have global brands, you're not integrated into the global economy, you don't have an adequate skilled workforce. I mean, I can go on and on.
Yeah.
Unless you have these things, frankly, your foreign policy is not going to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
You still have a foreign policy, you'll still do things,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not going to be seen as a serious player.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to strengthen the home base.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, one part of my answer to your question. The other is Pakistan's importance, you say. First of all, I think remember that there's been a historic rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And MBS has needed this because he has an economic vision for his country.
Mm-hmm.
And he feels that if continued turbulence and tensions with Iran not only distract Saudi Arabia, but expose Saudi Arabia to security threats from Iran.
Mm-hmm.
So his motivation is very, very clear. His vision is clear, which is what drove the rapprochement. The Iranians have been wanting the rapprochement because naturally they wanted to end their diplomatic isolation, and it did end their diplomatic isolation. So I think in that scenario, there's already that reduction of tensions going on anyway, and so many visits. And now, I mean, the Iranians consult with the Saudis. They've been telling the Saudis, why we carried out this act, why they carried out this action, and so on. This is all very new. So I don't think, I think we just need to look inwards also, because, one of the articles that I recently, well, it's not an article, but an extract from my chapter in my book that Dawn published on Sunday, which is yesterday. I talked about external overreach and internal underreach. Turn this around. We've got to flip this. You got to have your internal overreach has got to be strong enough to ensure that your external overreach, which actually I shouldn't be an overreach, has a solid foundation.
Yeah.
So the era of what you, Bilal, described as extracting rent from our geostrategic, that era is over. It's finished. It's gone. It's over. And I think the sooner Pakistan also, undertakes a paradigm shift in its policies and also launches internal reform, which we need across the board. We need economic reform. We need a reform of our educational system. We need reform of our civil service, comprehensive reform. I think this is what Pakistan needs right now, more than anything else. And if Pakistan was to do that, you will see that our partners and our would-be partners internationally will take us much more seriously.
Yeah, that's really fascinating insight, and thank you for putting it that way, because that's a very powerful way of saying that. I have a few more questions that I want to ask, and then we're going to open it up to more audience questions as well. You talked about weakness and strength sort of internally. Given Pakistan's desire to improve relations with India, Isagda recently signaled that as well, and it feels like we got a cold response from India, nothing warm from their side. How do you view that? And do you feel like, the imbalance of power between Pakistan and India is becoming more and more visible, even as we see Pakistan being ready for opening up trade, but not really getting much of a reaction from India, almost as if, it didn't matter?
Well, first of all, India is going to the polls later this month, April, May, because they have a very prolonged election. So I think these questions are kind of premature until there is a new government there. Now, it's likely that Prime Minister Modi is re-elected, in which case BJP's policies towards Pakistan are not going to change very much. And what we have seen in recent years is India saying, we're really not interested in having any kind of a relationship with you. So there's been no formal dialogue between the two countries. Trade was suspended. Our diplomatic ties were downgraded. So this is where we are. So, I think as far as the Foreign Minister Dar is concerned, he was responding to a question. I don't think he was signaling anything. Somebody asked a question in London at a presser. He responded. But if you look at the trade relationship, I think, what happened in 2019, and this is before India, I would say that let me put it this way, there are many obstacles to even resuming trade with India. Let me cite a couple. First, of course, the obstacle is that when India annexed illegally the state of Jammu and Kashmir, that's when, trade was suspended by Pakistan. And things got totally, frozen, the relationship went into deep freeze. But
Mhm.
even before that, several months before that, India had slapped a 200% customs duty on Pakistani exports, which makes it impossible for us. I mean,
Mhm.
we're not competitive if you put a 200% tax on us.
Mhm.
So there's that aspect which will have to be fixed. It's a huge obstacle.
Mhm.
The second is India has used, even the period when we had prolonged trade relations with India, our business community faced real problems because of what India uses with other countries as well, but with us much more so, which are non-tariff trade barriers.
Mhm.
So our stuff used to, for example, cross the Wagah border and then used to keep sitting there
Mhm.
until the bureaucratic process was over, and that's a non-tariff barrier,
Mhm.
because then we would never be able to deliver the goods to whoever had ordered the goods, and that was it, and the whole thing was cancelled. So
Yeah.
a great deal of this happened. Now,
Mhm.
I'm not saying we shouldn't have trade with India. I'm saying we will have to fix these problems.
Mhm.
And these problems will have to be fixed by mutual accommodation.
Mhm.
It'll have to be in the mutual interest of both countries to open up trade.
Mhm.
And India will have to show that it is responsive to some of these areas that I have just identified. We can't go with a 200% duty on our goods. They've got to do something about that. So I think, and of course, a major obstacle is that India now says that Kashmir is off the negotiating table. We don't want to
Mhm.
talk about it. So it's
Mhm.
over. It's finished.
Mhm.
We have to find a way to have a practical relationship with India, which is important, I think, while we sort of try to fix these problems and try to see how we can resolve some of these disputes. So I think that's basically where we are.
That's fascinating. And there's only one Pakistani neighbor that we haven't talked about yet, which is China. So now let's talk about China. We've heard about sort of a push from IMF for more transparency when it comes to CPEC, but also there's been a lot else sort of happening with China as well. Chinese workers were attacked sort of in Pakistan recently. You talked about how, the US views us through the prism of, okay, now we're in
Right.
China's camp.
Exactly.
So we might be in China's camp and think of us in China's camp, but as China sees the cost of maintaining a relationship with Pakistan, does China view us as Pakistan as somebody that they want in China's camp, regardless of what happens, as we see sort of, the IMF pushing for more transparency, as we see their workers becoming more insecure in Pakistan? How do you view sort of the
Well, first,
Pakistan-China
yeah,
relationship?
okay. First of all, I think let's be clear: the China-Pakistan relationship is not breaking news.
Mm-hmm.
This relationship has been around for over 7 decades.
Mm-hmm.
Strong relationship. What has happened since China's global rise as an economic powerhouse is
Mm-hmm.
that our relationship with China began to shift from defense and strategic cooperation to the economic track,
Mm-hmm.
which met entirely our interests. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I often argue that our relationship with China is so strong because China meets both Pakistan's defense strategic being one, and
Mm-hmm.
economic interests.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only country investing in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fact.
Yeah.
Uh, and CPEC is crucial because it has helped already, modernize Pakistan's infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
It has gone into energy projects. It has created livelihood for thousands of Pakistani people.
Mm-hmm.
And the second phase is about to begin of CPEC, which is the more industrialization phase. In fact, it has many elements which I won't go into right now. So, this is a very important relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chinese see Pakistan as a very important ally. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we're in any block. I don't think this is an era of blocks anymore, Bilal. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something that I was lecturing earlier today also. Uh, we are not in a tight bipolarity.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there are two big superpowers, sure. They're two big economic powers, United States and China. But there's no bipolarity of the kind that we saw during the Cold War. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, the world is increasingly multipolar, not bipolar. Although
Mm-hmm.
these two countries are much bigger than, in terms of strength, than anyone else, sure. But that doesn't mean that the entire space is occupied by them. No, that's not true. In fact, I argue that this is the era of middle powers.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Countries that have attributes that make them important on the international stage, where they can influence geopolitics. That's the definition of a middle power. So you can influence, geopolitics in many ways, by your economic strength, by your military, technology, let's say, by being diplomatically active, by having the best IT sort of industry in your country. I mean, look at Singapore. Singapore is tiny. It's a city state. It's a middle power. Middle power does not depend on population. And the two examples I cite, and I think that is for Pakistan to also sort of, I'm not saying we should emulate them, but examples of middle powers. Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, traditionally strong relationship with America, but it's now having as good a relationship with China, with huge trade and economic, ties.
Yeah.
Turkey, member of NATO, but has a good relationship with Russia.
Yeah.
And was even negotiating between Russia and Ukraine during the war. So look at these countries. So what these countries do is they leverage and play off the US-China competition.
Yeah.
But they want good relations with both. They're not part of any bloc. There's no bloc. But it is true. I mean, if you use another word, it is true that there are groupings in the world. There are alliances in the world, sure. But I don't think our relationship with China precludes us from having other relationships. And it shouldn't. And as far as the US is concerned, the one thing that I've never heard the Chinese say to us is, please limit your relationship with the US because, we don't really like it. In fact, they've told us the opposite. They've always said to us, have a good relationship with the United States. In fact, they say, we want to have it too. It's just that the US feels so threatened by us. Because they believe in the peaceful rise of China and so on. So I think we need to be smart, nimble, and we need to have a vision of where we want to go also in terms of our international diplomacy. But without that vision, it reminds me of that line from Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So we don't want to have a foreign policy which is like Alice in Wonderland.
Absolutely. And that was a story from Alice in Wonderland when I think the little girl reached a fork in the road and she was like, which way should I go? And they said, where do you want to go? And she's like, I don't know. And she's like, it doesn't matter which way you go.
Yes.
It's a beautiful story and very apt. I want to come to another question, which a lot of overseas Pakistanis are asking, which is how can they effectively contribute, back to the country and beyond just attending sessions and events? How can we contribute to research, innovation, sort of things like that? And you also mentioned in one of your answers something very powerful. You said, for Pakistan-US relations to go to the next level, you need a lot of imagination and you need to tap into the Pakistani American diaspora, which you have a lot of relationships with and sort of have done that successfully in the past. But I also want to get your comment quickly as part of this question. It feels like the Pakistani American diaspora in particular is coming of age. And it happened in the context of sort of some of the lobbying that's happening on behalf of PTI here. But we see that the Pakistani American community really mobilized sort of their congressmen and representatives to take a point of view with mixed success and sort of a mixed bag. But that feels like something new, like coming from the grassroots, sort of, and you can tell me if it's grassroots or not, but, curious to get your take. Like, do you feel like on the whole, like a Pakistani American community becoming more politically mobilized is a good thing for Pakistan in the long term? And how can Pakistan be more strategic about tapping into that community?
Well, I think absolutely. And I agree with you, Bilal. I think it has come of age. And I think some of our entrepreneurs, some of the people, actually in different professions, and that's the beauty of it, that they are in different professions. And they're very connected to American society. They're very much mainstreamed into American society. All of that, it's a precious, precious resource for Pakistan. But then Pakistan, as in terms of the government, needs to know how it wishes to engage the community, how it wishes to reach out to the community to ask them for ideas about many things that they would have. They have the skills to do certain things that perhaps we don't. How can those skills be transferred, for example? And then, in terms of what they can do, naturally, we would want them to come and invest in Pakistan. We would like them to also be ambassadors for Pakistan as far as they can in, wherever they are in the United States, especially those who are politically engaged. Ambassadors of Pakistan in the sense that, of course, they're American citizens, but ambassadors, let's say, perhaps I'm saying, not putting it correctly, ambassadors for promoting Pakistan-US relations. Let's put it that way. Then I know of so many who are my friends who are engaged in funding and setting up even NGOs which are doing, sort of spectacular development work in Pakistan in areas like education and health. I mean, this is very inspiring and impressive stuff. So all of these can be built on, because naturally none of this is enough. And then also, I think on the economic front, being able to guide the government, again, it's for the government then to reach out to people there, to ask, okay, what do you think we should do to get greater investor interest, going? So, there's plenty. I'm sort of thinking how to sort of shorten my answer. That's why I'm stumbling a little bit, but there is so much to do. But it does need a systematic effort by the government of Pakistan to first not just say at the declaratory level that, this is a great diaspora, but actually act on it and see what kind of an interaction you can have to get the benefit of their ideas, resources, wisdom, skills. I think this really is something waiting to be done.
Absolutely. No, and I couldn't agree more with you. In fact, me and Ali were talking about this in that context. Even Paklaunch is a great example of the overseas diaspora getting together, mobilizing, putting investment back into Pakistan. But how can we structure that, systemize that? How can we create even a bigger impact are all questions that we continue to think about. One more question that we got was, what are the interests of the U.S. in Afghanistan now? And are there any interests that the U.S. has in Afghanistan? And what implications does that have for Pakistan? Are they asking Pakistan for anything, whether it's military bases or some kind of intelligence? From being based here in the U.S., Afghanistan is just not a part of the conversation here. But just curious for your take, if you feel
I think Bilal, you're absolutely right. It's basically over as far as the U.S. is concerned. But I think its only interest now, interest in Afghanistan is to ensure that the country doesn't become a hotbed or a haven for terrorist groups that can threaten Western interests. So I think that creates an area of cooperation between Pakistan and the United States, but it's a very narrow bandwidth. It doesn't take us very far because it's such a limited it's a narrow concern. It is a concern nonetheless, but it's a narrow concern. There isn't much else on which we can cooperate vis-a-vis Afghanistan, that is. And right now, our own leverage with Afghanistan, you can see the state of that leverage. So we don't have much to offer in that sense,
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very limited at this moment. I'm going to a few questions from the chat, and they're responding to some of the things that you said. One of the questions is, why would Israel want escalation in the region beyond its current focus on Gaza? So this is in context of your answer to say nobody wants an escalation, in the region,
of course,
except Israel. So can you talk a little bit about why Israel would want an escalation?
Israel has been trying for years to draw the United States in for an attack on Iran, its principal enemy in the Middle East. It seeks to do that now. In fact, the attack that Israel launched on the Iranian consulate in Syria was part of that effort. And I think the US sees that for what it is. The US, so it's in Israel's interest to escalate. Absolutely, no question about it. I mean, it's doing what it's doing in Gaza with impunity. There's nobody there to stop them. Nobody. I mean, the US keeps making noises from time to time, but doesn't really use enough or mount enough pressure. But I think we could be seeing a change now, because I think the Biden administration is increasingly frustrated with Israel. And I think domestic opinion in America has also had a role to play, because that has turned quite decisively against the military actions that Israel is taking in Gaza. So, plus, a conflict with Iran takes the entire international focus away from Gaza.
Yeah.
I mean, the Israelis would love that. I mean, let's face it, they're diplomatically isolated on Gaza. I mean, which country is standing with them right now? Even the Americans say, just make sure they're not civilian casualties. So other than America and the UK, there's nobody who's standing with Israel anymore.
And how seismic is that shift? Because you've been in those corridors for a long time. Like, it feels like a real shift from how Israel has been supported in the past unconditionally. Like, does it feel real to you as well?
Yeah. I think there is a shift. We don't know where it'll go eventually, but certainly there is a shift. And I think global public opinion is certainly, frankly, disgusted with what Israel has continued to do, defying now the UN Security Council resolutions, defying international opinion, defying the International Court of Justice. It's not just a Muslim issue anymore. It's look at the kind of reaction we've seen. The biggest demonstrations in solidarity with the Palestinians were in London. Many cities of the United States.
Yeah.
Many cities in Europe even.
Yeah.
So, that also has an impact on the governments of those countries.
Absolutely.
So yes, I think we are seeing a shift.
Yeah. I mean, Trump was asking them to wrap up the war quickly.
Yes.
There was a Genocide Joe sort of thing at his rally. It's like, that's not true. It's just, unbelievable that even in the Republican base, they would find support like that. Another question from the chat: will the senior Saudi delegation's visit to Pakistan this week result in tangible investments, or will it primarily involve in the signing of MOUs without yielding substantial outcomes?
Well, if I was a foreign minister, I would know more, but I'm not. I think we have to wait and see. It's a follow-up to Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's visit. When, the Saudis said, yes, we would like to come in and invest in certain areas. Plus, I think Pakistan is also trying to interest them in some state-owned enterprises, which it wishes to privatize. So, there may be some interest there, but I think it's very hard for me to say, I mean, I think the hope is there that it does translate into actual investments on the ground, but we have to wait and see. Plus, I think, I mean, again, I'll come back to the point about, the environment. I mean, we've got to make sure that the macroeconomic environment is stable, because even your best friend will not come and invest if the situation in the country is, you're lurching from one political crisis to another, or you don't have enough confidence in the judicial enforcement, let's say, which is very key for investors. And of course, you have a surge in militant attacks. So, all of these, the point is that you can't deal with any of these things in silos.
Yeah.
Economic investment depends critically on political stability and a secure environment. So you can't sort of say we've given investors the best deal, please just come. They won't. They'll only come if they feel safe, and if they feel there is consistency of policy, and if they also feel that they can repatriate their profits, because that's been an issue when we had a dollar crunch. None of the companies that were already here couldn't really repatriate profits and bills,
And ironically, the dollar crunch happened when the current foreign minister was the finance minister. And this leads to the next question, which is, related to what you just said, which is, how can we expect foreign investment or tech coming to Pakistan in such an environment of low trust as well as political instability? And so the question is, if you can see it, if we can see it, on why investment is not coming, why can't the powers that be see it? That political stability is part of sort of being able to attract foreign investment.
I think there's a tendency, and I don't think it's it's limited to a particular government, but I think the tendency of people in power is to see these issues in silos. I think that's part of the problem. You can't see these things in silos. Everything is connected to everything else. So therefore, whoever's asked this question has asked the right question. You've got to fix all of this. and then expect. Now, the Chinese, as you were mentioning before, the security of Chinese workers, no, for the Chinese also. I mean, they have done, this is part of a strategic investment in Pakistan. It's economic and strategic. But naturally, they don't want their people to be mowed down like this. And of course, it raises the question of who's actually behind this. Clearly, somebody or elements or forces that don't like the Pakistan-China relationship. There's no doubt about that. It's not just happening in the vacuum. But what it does is that it does, make your best friend, as it were, say to you that, look, you got to get this done. You got to get this right. Otherwise, these projects will come to a halt. So the security angle is extremely key. Plus, I think, again, what seems to be underestimated here, governments, their tenures, let governments complete their tenures. The moment you disrupt governments, what happens is that new government then departs from the policy of the previous government. So you have policy inconsistency. Worst thing for an investor. Investor doesn't know what the rules will be with the next government. So I think fundamental sort of respect for whoever the people have elected, whether you like them, Bilal, or I like them, besides the point. People have voted for them, we accept them. And let them govern. And let the electorate then decide if they want them again or they don't want them again. So, all of this needs to be. And I think that's where we are. I mean, I always sort of say, today we confront a polycrisis. We confront a polycrisis because there's several crises that are converging to create a bigger challenge than any single crisis.
Yeah.
And we can no longer kick the can down the road. We've got to address all of them, including, and I think somebody asked about education. I mean, for me, it's fundamental. There is no country in the world that has made economic progress on an illiterate base. 40% of our people are still illiterate. 40%. We have 22 million children out of school. This can't go. This is an education emergency. We need to fix this. Because these people then, these people face a jobless and a hopeless future because they're not educated. They're not going to be any jobs for them. They'll live a life of poverty. I mean, this is something I feel very strongly about. And I think, last point I'll make, again, it's related to this. Pakistan has to seriously invest in human capital. Seriously. Seriously. It's not about the next tranche from the IMF. It's about investing in your people. If you don't invest in your people, you cannot make economic progress. No way. Just can't do it.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more there. And I still remember your article on polycrisis. It was a paradigm shift when you authored that, and it sort of gave everybody a prism to be able to re-see our crisis through a different lens. There's one question here that I like that we can perhaps end on, which is if you were to magically become foreign minister of Pakistan, what would your top 3 priorities be in terms of, how would you sort of structure yourself in Pakistan's priorities?
Well, the first thing I would do is to carry out a broad review of our foreign policy. We have not done that for decades. The world has changed around us. In fact, the dynamics of change, I mean, the world is changing so fast. Regionally, as Bilal, you were talking about some of these changes. And I was also talking about some of these changes. Some are challenges, some are opportunities. We simply have not been able to then review the entire gamut of our foreign policy to see how we can pursue our goals in this new environment, which, as I said before, is multipolar. There's opportunities for middle powers. So we need to do that broad review and then place each relationship within that and see the interconnections. Because we're unable to. We also deal with our relationships with major powers in silos. Can't do that. Shouldn't do that. Because what we are left with then is a foreign policy which is ad hoc, reactive, and it only sort of reacts to whatever's happening rather than taking initiatives. And again, I return to the word, it's very important for me, without the imagination. You have to, first of all, you have to imagine a better future for yourself at home and then have a strategy to go to that. But the same goes for foreign policy. You've got to be able to imagine on the basis, of course, or whatever your diplomatic resources are. You have to, square ends with means. You can't sort of, the two can't be out of sync. So I think that's what I would do as my major priority. And then, of course, I would look at where the economic opportunities lie, and see if I can integrate our economic sort of policies with that, so that diplomacy begins to reflect what our economic goals are. And I don't mean in terms of commercial diplomacy that, who can we, I mean more in terms of, more in the macro sense. So you integrate. So that's the second thing I would do. And the third thing I would do, I think, is to put my head down, and rather than take one visit after another and do photo ops, just sit down and look at the key relationships and how we can strengthen them or how we can reset them. So in terms of, focus on policy rather than visits, because at times I've critiqued governments for having a visit centered approach to foreign policy. They think that if they've gone on a visit somewhere, that's foreign policy. No, it isn't. It's a visit.
Yeah.
It should be part of policy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we've come up on time, but I just want to say those were such wise words on focusing on impact versus activity, on doing a review of where our foreign policy has been, what's worked, what's not worked, which we've not done. It's staggering, actually, how long we've not had these kind of a deep review with, and then using our imagination to create the next generation of our foreign policy. I hope you get appointed foreign minister because that we could benefit
Dream on, dream on.
from such wisdom as a country. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Maleeha. This was a real joy and pleasure chatting with you and learning from you as always. I really appreciate you, and everybody else. I appreciate your time today as well. We will post this on our social channels for you to have as record as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Maleeha.
Thank you, Bilal. And again, a big thank you to Ali.
Yes, absolutely.
He's there somewhere. So thank you, Ali, and thank you, Bilal.
Thank you.